on a more happier note. Today we're going to talk about how do we build this unshakable connection with Hashem. And it's so funny because when I was preparing the show, I was like looking at all these different types of videos, and I'm like, trying to find material, and there literally weren't a lot of shurim on like how do we create that unbreakable bond with Hashem, because religion and our faith and our relationship with Hashem is constantly up, down, up, down, up, down. So how do we keep holding tight to something that sometimes can be, moving right, left and right, up and down. So we don't really know how to create that stable relationship. So it's interesting because we have a commandment in the Torah that says, Da et Hashem Elokecha. Know Hashem your God, right? That's the translation. And Hashem made a commandment for every single Jew that you need to know Hashem your God. So it doesn't make sense because it's not like Hashem was like, okay, I'm making a commandment for the big Rabbanim, the big Tzaddikim, the people who are studying Torah all day. He says, no, 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 no. Know Hashem your God. Every single Jew needs to know Hashem his God. And it's a commandment. It's not something that's like, oh, if you want to, you can, get to know Hashem. It's a commandment. Hashem says, I command you to know me. Now, how does that make sense? How can you command someone to love something that is not even a thing, that we can't feel him, we can't touch him, we can't see him, we can't taste him, we can't use our senses to experience Hashem? So how is it possible that Hashem says, Da'et Hashem Elokecha, know Hashem your God, you need to know me? Hashem actually created us with 5 senses in order to gain knowledge, right? That is how we gain knowledge in our mind. So when we're babies, right, and you're given the first, little bite of a cookie, oh my gosh, a cookie tastes good. This is what a cookie tastes like. Then you smell the baking in the oven, and you're like, oh, mommy's making cookies. Then you see a cookie, and okay, this is the form and shape of a cookie. We use our senses in order to gain knowledge. Now, when Hashem says, Da et Hashem Elokecha, he says, you need to know me in the same way that you can sense different things around you, right? And so when you see Vaidatam Ki Ani Hashem, you also see when you go into a synagogue, you'll see that when you put the Sefer Torah into the big Aron HaKodesh, it actually says in some synagogues, again, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before who you stand. Again, the word Da, know. So again, we see that it's a commandment, right? But the truth is, even if we experience everything through our senses, it doesn't necessarily mean we understand everything that we sense. Why? I'll give you an example. If I'm on a phone call with someone, right? I'm talking to Eden, who I FaceTime all day, every second of the day. And I'm like, I know that there's cellular towers and it's transmitting EMF and all of these things, but we don't really think about that while it's happening. We just know, okay, I'm having a conversation with my sister. So I'm having an experience, but in the same way, I still know there's a behind the scenes, but I don't really know what it is. So in the same way, how we connect to Hashem through the senses is really, we know that Hashem is the creator of the world. And the way we can experience Hashem, so to speak, is sensing through his creation, right? The environment that we're in. When we look at animals, the biology of things, we start to see, wow, Hashem has really created everything so incredibly well, right? And so when we're constantly being exposed to his creation and the environment around us, we're able to kind of also understand the scope of Hashem's ability, like how vast is the world, the galaxy, the stars. We're seeing Hashem's power in the universe, even though we don't know Hashem, but we really kind of understand his ability and his omnipotence and so forth. So if we keep going with that logic, right, we also come to the conclusion that Hashem is in everything. And the goal when Hashem says da, know, is also to be able to sensitize our senses. And I'm going to explain in a little bit, so that we're able to pinpoint the times where Hashem is really, truly present in our lives. And I'm going to give you an example, which is like, this is one of my favorite characters in the Torah, and my son is named after him, Gabriel Yosef. Yosef HaTzadik, alav shalom, was an incredible figure because he had so many tribulations and so many challenges, and he went through so many things. And in Parashat Vayeshev, what does it say? Vayehi Hashem et Yosef, vayehi ish matzliach. And Yosef was a successful man. So what does it mean Yosef was a successful man? We're like, okay, he was sold into slavery. His mother passed away. He went through all these challenges. And we see Yosef was successful. How does that make sense? So Rashi interprets Shem Shamayim Shagur Befiv. The name of Hashem was familiar in his mouth, meaning that every single thing that happened to Yosef HaTzadik, he said everything is Hashem Yitbarach. Every little thing from something small to something large is Hashem Yitbarach. And so for him, that was his blessing. He always says, with Hashem's help, I will be able to conquer. Every single thing from every single challenge that he had, whether big or small, which they were mostly big challenges, he said everything is all Hashem. So when Paro actually came to Yosef and he asked him, can you interpret my dream? What did Yosef say? Vaya'an Yosef, this is in Hebrew, et Paro le'emor biladi, Elohim ya'aneh et shalom Paro. What did he respond? He said, it's not I that will interpret your dream. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. Meaning that it's all Hashem. Even in front of one of the most powerful people in the world, he wasn't afraid to say, oh, no, it's not me. Ze lo ani ve'otzem yadi. It's Hashem Yitbarach. But the question is, why was Yosef's emunah so strong? How does it make sense? He's constantly battling with everything that's going on in his life. And he still is holding on. He's like, Hashem's with me, Hashem's with me. You're like, wait, how did he have such an emunah in Hashem? What was the grip that he had during all the times where he could have slipped? What kept him going? Right? What was the secret? So I want to take you a little bit back to Yosef's life. And I want you to take a moment and just be with Yosef for 1 minute, right? I want to go back to where they sell Yosef. Yosef's brothers decide, okay, we're going to throw him in the pit. And while they threw him in the pit, they were like sitting and having lunch, like while they're literally throwing him in the pit. And they decide, and right when they're eating, they see that there's a crowd of merchants carrying spices, and they're heading to Egypt. So the brothers looked at each other and they're like, oh, that's an idea. Let's sell him to Egypt. Let's sell him to these merchants. This is exactly the text, the pasuk, where they introduce the merchants are coming in. וישבו לאכול לחם, ויישאו עיניהם, ויראו, והנה אורחת ישמעאלים באה מגלעד, וגמליהם נושאים נכואות וצרי ולות, הולכים להוריד מצרימה. I'll translate. They sat to eat bread, we're talking about Yosef's brothers, they raised their eyes, and behold, they saw Ishmaelites coming from Gilad, and their camels carrying caravans filled with spices, and they were heading to Egypt. Now, there's a big question that forms here, because every single word in the Torah has a meaning. There's no wasted words. And they say, why is it so important that they were saying the caravans were holding spices? What do we care what's in the caravans, right? And the answer that Rashi gives is that in those days, the Arab merchants, all they ever traded, like this was unheard of that they were carrying spices, because all they ever traded was petroleum and tar. And here we are, the Arab merchants are literally coming with the caravans, heading to Yosef and the brothers, and they're carrying spices. So what's the problem here? So basically, instead of Yosef heading to Egypt, which was a long trip, right? When he was sold, he was being exposed, instead of petroleum tar, which was really foul smelling, he would be exposed to like rose water, really nice spices. So he would have like a nice ride to Egypt, right? While he's being, he's going into slavery. So like, what's the big deal here? We're like, okay, Hashem, like you could have made the caravan broke down, Joseph goes free, throw down some balloons, and like, Baruch Hashem saved him. No, it was like a little thing, a little change, that the Arab merchants, instead of carrying petroleum, they carry beautiful spices. So you're like, okay, like Hashem, like it's Yosef, like misken, like his mom dies, the brothers sell him to slavery, this, that, misken, like what more, does he need to have? So you're like, okay, what's going on here? Like, why is this specific pasuk so important? So what really happened here? So for a minute, I want you to be Yosef. His mom dies. When he hears that he's going to have a brother, he's so excited. Then his mom dies during labor. Then his brothers are jealous of him his entire life. Then Yaakov says, hey, Yosef, by the way, can you go check on your brothers? And then he goes to go check on his brothers. And then his brothers decide that they're going to throw him in the pit. So all he's thinking is, wait a second, what if my dad sold me out and he told me to go get my brothers because they were all planning to throw me in the pit? He doesn't know. Yosef is 18 years old at this point. So what's he thinking? Hold on, my dad sold me out. My brother sold me out. My mom is dead. Like, I literally have nothing to live for. So he's starting to descend into loneliness and hopelessness. And he's like in the pit, and he's really just like depressed. And he gets into the caravan, and what does he do? He goes, I don't understand. He goes, this is Ishmaelim. He goes, Ishmaelim don't sell spices. They sell petroleum and tar. And he understands that Hashem is with him in that exact moment, because he said, no, there's no coincidence here. I was supposed to be in a caravan that smelled so bad that you could literally die from the smell because it's so strong. And here Hashem made a little miracle for me that I'm going to be smelling spices on the way to Egypt. For the first time in Jewish history, Yosef understood Hashem's language. And I'll explain to you why. Historically, Hashem, when he spoke to Yosef's ancestors, when he said to Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'eretz moladetcha, he spoke to Avram, go from your land and go to a strange land. So Avram's like, okay, I trust you, Hashem, right? He's speaking directly to Avram. He's speaking Avram's language. Then he told Yaakov the same way. You need to go down to Egypt, right? He explains to him in Yaakov's language, you need to go down to Egypt. But with Yosef, there was no communication from Hashem. When I say communication, there was no clear language between Yosef and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Yosef was the first figure in history that was able to decipher Hashem's language in the way he wanted to speak, not in the way he is supposed to speak by English or, through a regular communication. So that was the first thing that Yosef was able to establish.
Smell.
Huh?
Smell.
Right. And he was the first one, by the way, exactly like you said, able to take the senses and to elevate it into a way where he was like, Hashem is with me. And so Hashem never told Yosef, go down to Egypt. Don't worry, I am with you. Hineni ani po, I'm here. Don't worry, I am with you. I am God, which is what he told Moshe, right? Moshe, he went in the burning bush, same thing. He spoke to Moshe. Moshe heard a voice, right? He said, Moshe, Hineni, I am Hashem. Yosef was the only one that was supposed to understand Hashem's language in the language of coincidence. Okay? And so Hashem is saying to Yosef, not in English, not in Hebrew, not in Spanish, not in his language, but in the way that Hashem expresses himself also to us. In everyday life, we have these little coincidences that Hashem is trying to speak to us and we don't realize. Because what are we trying to think? What are we trying to accomplish with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Maybe he'll come to me in a dream, he'll send me a message, it's going to be an open miracle, right? Nes galui. But that's not the way Hashem communicates with us. Sometimes it's in the little nuances of every day. So what was Yosef's hack that made him hear Hashem? It was his humility and his ability to hear the way God speaks, not the way we speak. And so Yosef held on and held on. Potiphar tried to seduce him. Then he goes to jail. And then he solves someone's dreams. And then he's still not being, he was promised that he'll come out. He doesn't come out. His mother dies. His brothers sell him. He thinks that his father set him up. He has all of these challenges and he's still holding on. He's still holding on because he understands Hashem is speaking to him not in the language that he spoke to his father and his forefathers. He's speaking to him in the language of the senses. Moshe, when he was on Al Sinai, he went into a cave, right? And there was a huge laser light show, and there was, the burning bush, and it was like, a whole festival, right? Hashem's like, okay, Hashem is here. It's like a big deal, right? The same thing with the prophet Elijah when he was running away from Jezebel. I don't know if you guys know the story. It was like this apparently very manipulative princess who was trying to torture Elijah, and basically he went into the mountain of Horeb, which is where Hashem spoke to Moshe. And he said, okay, Hashem's going to speak to me here. He's going to give me some information. He goes to Mount Horeb. He sees there's a thunderstorm. Hashem's still not there. He sees there's an earthquake. Still wasn't Hashem. There was a firestorm. Still Hashem's not there. He's not speaking to him. And finally, they say in the book of Nevi'im, the book of prophecies, that Hashem came to him in something called Kol Demama Daka. In translation, it means a sound with no effect. Something so silent, you can barely hear it. It's almost like a silent speech. Elijah understood that Hashem is speaking to me, not in the way that he spoke to Moshe, and not in the way that he spoke to Abraham, in the way that maybe it's a feeling of clarity for me. But he doesn't necessarily have to be like, I am here, I am Hashem, your God. It's in a way that I will understand. And so there's a speech, a silent speech that sometimes we get every single day, maybe a feeling, a sense of clarity, a sense of oh my gosh, connecting the pieces, right? And that's where Hashem says, yes, I'm here. This is what I mean. This is the sign, right? And so every single day, we think that Hashem doesn't talk to us because we rely on the basics of our senses, right? We rely on the fact that, okay, it's going to be a miracle, it's going to be a dream, it's going to be something. But really, sometimes it's something silent that we have to kind of just turn up the volume a little bit, right? And so every single one of us in this room, every single day, Hashem is trying to speak to us, and we either ignore because we have so many distractions, right? Netflix, kids, going out, you staying up late, whatever it is that you have, whatever distraction, work, whatever it is, we don't realize that sometimes Hashem is really speaking to us, and we need to understand the small little microscopic times where Hashem's like, I'm trying to shake you up, right? If we take a moment to listen, to tune in, to turn into humility a little bit, and to be like Yosef, to emulate Yosef, where even the smallest thing, like spices instead of petroleum, was able to tell him, Hashem is with me, Hashem is here. In order to build a connection with Hashem, we have to build that humility. And that is first. That is how we create a connection. We have to sensitize the senses, right? I feel like that's like a play in words. Sensitize the senses in a way where every little thing that we do, we're like, wow, Hashem is present, Hashem is here. So that's step one. I want to give you a few personal examples, and my husband would like laugh if I tell you this example, because he would be like, oh my gosh, like that's not Hashem talking to you. I'm like, yes, it is, babe. Like it's my language, you know? So he gave me a really good example. So I'll mention him first. But he said, one day he was driving, and he always prays that he will have the ability to lishmor et ha'einayim shelo, to protect his eyes. And a lot of people who are not religious don't understand this, and I didn't understand this in the past, because they were like, I was like, oh my God, what's the big deal? It's a woman with shorts, like, but really now I understand that when someone is, all they think about is their wife, when there's someone else in the picture, sometimes you can't take away the image in your head, or sometimes, you're imagining other things because you're exposed to it. So it's much easier to stay committed to your wife if that's the only person you're thinking about, right? And so anyways, he was telling me that, usually prays for this, and he does like, special prayers to make sure that his eyes are always protected. And one day he's driving, and there's an entire, like, I don't want to say cult, but like a crowd of like women in bikinis. Like no one's wearing like a shirt, crop top, nothing, just like complete bikinis. There was like at least 10, 15 girls. And like, he's a man, so he's really trying not to look. He's like, no, like I'm a married man, whatever. He's like looking at his wedding band, like, but a man is a man. And he like, they say when you look once, it's by accident. When you look twice, it's like intentional. So he was like looking once, and then he realized, okay, it's like women with bikinis. And he sees that there's a bus, a giant bus just stops right in front of them. And he was not able to see anybody because it completely blocked the image. And he said that the more he kept driving, the bus was literally driving with him, so that he would not be able to even see one woman that was in bikinis. And I was like, that's what? So I was like, that's so incredible that he was able to even realize that. Somebody else would have been like, okay, yeah, this bus needs to move, like he was able to figure that little like detail in his daily life, that he was like, wow, Hashem is with me. Wow, like Hashem is helping me protect my eyes. Another story I have, and I feel like I mention it every class because it's like such a special story for me, but I'll mention it again. Sorry, guys, whoever heard it. When I was pregnant with my third child, Naomi, so my baby was breached. I was 37 weeks. You give birth at 40. So 37 was like relatively late. And he's like, oh, your baby's breached. And I go, well, what do you mean? It's my third baby. My two other kids were fine. Like, what do you mean my baby is breached? He's like, your baby is breached. Like the head is right here. And he goes, and that's the hardest like position usually. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So anyways, he's like, so either you can have a C-section at 39 weeks, we schedule a C-section, or we try to turn the baby. So I'm like, right away, okay, let's turn the baby. He goes, but it's not that easy, because if we try to turn the baby and God forbid the heart rate drops or whatever it is, we have to do an emergency C-section, and I was only 37 weeks. So he's like, you have to make the decision of what's going to be a risk, what's not. Right away, obviously, I called my Rabbanit from Jerusalem that I studied with, and I was like, Betty, Rabbanit, what do I do? And she goes, okay, fast, call this rabbi in France, who's also, he's a doctor, and he'll tell you what to do. So I'm like, okay, but Betty, it's 2 a.m. She goes, it's fine, tell him I sent you. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this, whatever. Anyways, I was like scheduled, like, I think within 2 days to like decide what to do. So I call this doctor rabbi, and the woman's like, it's 2 a.m. Like basically like, don't call it here ever again. So I'm like, okay, whatever. Like that clearly wasn't an answer for me. I was like, okay, it's clearly, my answer is not from my Rabbanit in Jerusalem. It's not from this doctor. I need to figure out a way where like I can figure out what Hashem wants. So I was like, okay, you know what? Like, I never wrote a letter to the Rabbi. Like, let me try writing a letter to the Rabbi. I'm Chabad by heart, but my husband likes all trades. So, I was like, okay, let me write a letter to the Rabbi. So my husband's like, looking at me like, Sean, like, you're not gonna like, like, let's be honest here. I'm like, no, babe, like, I really believe, like, Bezat Hashem, I'll find an answer. He like believes I'm like very dramatic, every little thing. Like, I'm like, oh, Hashem, Hashem. It's everybody what they believe. So they say like when you write to the Rebbe, you have to like wash your hands, and it's like a whole serious thing. You write a letter to the Rebbe and you pray that Bezat Hashem, Hashem will give you a sign. So I'm like, okay, I write a letter to the Rebbe. I'm like crying, please, Rebbe, like I need to know what to do, whatever. But really, I'm like, Hashem, give me the sign, because it's not the Rebbe that gives you the sign, it's Hashem. So so I write the letter, and usually you like put the letter in a book, like you open the page and then you get the answer. But since I didn't have the book, there's like an app where you can choose from thousands of letters. You just choose one, and then that should be your answer. So if I remember correctly, I opened the letter, and in the beginning it was like a something personal to someone, and then right in the middle he says, remember that Hashem is the healer of all healers, so you do not need to rely on doctors. He said, go in the most natural way if this is the decision that needs to be made. And he said, in the zechut, and this was like the craziest part, in the zechut of the teachings that you give to Bnei Israel, your family shall always be protected. And I was like, I'm like, I called, and then I remember she was the first I called, and she's like, what's wrong? What happened? I'm like, I messaged the Rebbe, and this is what he wrote. And anyways, like my husband comes and he's like, what's wrong with you? And I tell him, and he's like, oh my God. So again, you have to figure out where is your language and how is Hashem speaking to you? Because maybe my husband wouldn't have figured that for him, but the bus stop was a huge thing, right? So everybody has their language where Hashem speaks to them. So fast forward, after I got the answer, I was like, okay, scheduled, I forgot what it's called, I think ECV, where you're turning the baby. So I'm going to turn the baby, and they come, and I go to the hospital, and they're like, listen, we just want to let you know, like, this usually it's not like a successful procedure. Like, nobody really schedules it nowadays. And I go, how come? And they're like, it just usually doesn't work. It's not really successful. It's like a 50-50 chance, but really, like, we haven't seen it so successful in this hospital. So I was like, okay, like, I'm kind of like freaking out now. And they give you a shot, like, to make sure you're not getting contractions. And he starts like, so then they asked me, do you want an epidural? I'm like, I'm not giving birth today. And they're like, no, it's for the procedure. I go, what do you mean? They're like, it's like not very comfortable. So whatever, nobody prepped me for the amount of pain I was ever going to have. Like, I think it's the most pain anybody ever has in their life. But anyways, it was like a 3-minute, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. He turns the baby, and he has to check every few seconds that, everything is fine with the baby. And after 3 minutes, Baruch Hashem, the baby turns. And you had to see, like, my doctor was like, yes, like it was like as if like he did not believe that it was going to happen. And the second I saw his reaction in my head, I'm like, my daughter's name is going to be Hodaya, because I want to thank Hashem for this moment that Baruch Hashem, I was safe from having a C-section. And in my head, this is what I'm thinking. And now my husband tells me, in retrospect, he tells me that in that moment where he also looked at the doctor's face, he said, I'm going to name my daughter Hodaya. Wow. And we never spoke about it. And then he tells me, my brother calls me a minute later after the baby turned. He FaceTimes me in order to make sure that everything went well. So my brother-in-law calls my husband, and he tells him, no, so what happened? So he said, yeah, Baruch Hashem, the baby turned. He goes, wow, you should really do a Seudat Hodaya. I was like, come on, guys. Like, like Hashem's here, right here with me, like whispering the name. So for me, that was it wasn't like a nuance. It was a big thing. What? I think her first name's Naomi. Her first name's Naomi, but her middle name is Hodaya. And that was always going to be her name. I was like obsessed with the name Naomi. So there are a lot of stories like that I have, where it's like I found the little details in my experiences where I'm like, okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's here. Another story, and this will be the last before I go on to the next thing, and it'll be short. So after my second pregnancy, for those of you, I don't know if you know, but I had like a lot of like neurological issues after giving birth to Rafael, my second. And I'm going from neurologist to neurologist, ENT, whichever like doctor you can imagine, I probably went to, and I probably know his first and last name. And anyways, the neurologist was like, you know what, for peace of mind, let's schedule you for an MRI. I'm like, okay, perfect. What? I know. I was like, whatever, let's just, so that I have peace of mind, I'll just make sure everything's fine. So they scheduled me, let's say that Friday. So that Thursday, the day before I was supposed to have my MRI, they call me and they're like, hi, we just want to confirm that you're not pregnant because the MRI is tomorrow and it's very dangerous for like first trimester. So I was like, no, I'm not pregnant. Everything's fine. Literally 5 minutes later, I'm walking into the elevator in my building and this Israeli woman looks at me. Now my stomach's flat. Like I gave birth a year ago, like Baruch Hashem, went back to normal. And she goes, are you pregnant? And I kid you not, this is what I did. I'm like, Hashem, no. I was like, I have an MRI scheduled tomorrow. Like my body is not like ready for another pregnancy. Like, no way. So I'm like, you know what? Like Hashem doesn't speak, like Hashem speaks in coincidence. So like, let me go take a pregnancy test just to make sure because I have an MRI tomorrow. Take a pregnancy test and I was pregnant with my third. Yeah, I was like really not ready for it, but Hashem, I was able to connect the dots and be like, okay, this is Hashem's way of speaking to me. So you're going to have experiences in your life where every single day you're going to have these little nuances where Hashem's trying to connect with you. And because sometimes we're not building that connection with Hashem, that we tend to ignore it or we kind of, lose our thoughts and other distractions. But really Hashem is saying, here's what I'm trying to tell you, right? So this is number one, right? So this is how we connect with Hashem. We look through him with the senses by elevating the senses and paying attention to the details in our life every day. The Rambam also once gave an answer to a question that somebody asked, is it possible for Hashem to be so infinite, right, in his divine presence and to also be able to give us free will to worship him? How does that make sense? You can't be like infinite and then like be able to know past, present, future, but then also give us free will because you already know what we're going to do. So how does that make sense? So the Rambam answered and he says, we can't understand it. So like people were getting mad. They're like, what do you mean? If you don't have an answer, don't ask the question. Like, give me a right answer. And the Baal Shem Tov actually gave such a beautiful answer. He said, in the same way that Hashem is infinite, right, in his divine presence, he also has infinite love for us. And so because of that, because he loves us so much, he gives us the freedom to choose to love him back. Because if he was not able to give us the freedom to choose, he cannot love us, right? Because we would just be robots and he would not be able to be a king who rules over a nation. In order to be a king who rules over a nation, you need to have the freedom, right? To choose whether you're going to worship him or not. And so Hashem says, even though I'm infinite, I'm going to suspend my infinity because I have so much infinite love for you, right? And so there's no way to have a relationship with Hashem unless we have the ability to choose, right? Or else it would be like, having a relationship with a robot, do this, do that, and then, you're not thinking for yourself. And it's an incredible idea because I think about the idea behind prayer, right? When we try to connect with Hashem and we have the ability to choose, I want to pray to Hashem, I want to have a connection with Hashem. And so think about it, we have Shacharit, Mincha, Aravit, right? And it's kind of like a marriage, you're checking up on your husband, like in the morning, you have breakfast together, okay, bye, see you later. Then, in the middle of the day, depending on the husband, you'll call him and be like, how's work? How's everything? Whatever. And then, later on you see him for dinner and make sure, you're checking in a couple times a day. It's the same thing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wants you to check in on him and he wants to check in on you, right? To see how you're doing. So we want to make sure, and this is how Tefillah guides us in the way that we can connect Hashem. We have Shacharit, Mincha, Aravit, checkpoints, right? Checkpoints with Hashem. And so with that choice, we make the decision. How present do we want Hashem in my life? How often do I find him in my experiences? How often do I have a dialogue with him, right? And we have that concept of Yitbodedut. Yitbodedut means being solitary, right? Being in solitude by yourself and speaking to Hashem. And this is a concept that was coined by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, right? And when we talk about Hashem's presence every day, we really can't accomplish that without the Yitbodedut, without speaking to him and being like, Hashem, I had a hard day today. Hashem, help me with this. I really don't know how I'm going to do this, right? Every single person has the challenges that they're dealing with today, whether it's finding a shidduch, whether it's shlom bayit, whether it's having a baby, whether it's having a healthy pregnancy, whatever it is that everybody's going through in their life, there's a time where you just kind of want to cry to Hashem and be like, listen, Hashem, like, do you got me or not? Like, you could just speak to him in your language, right? And so now when I say How do we say, for those of you who speak Hebrew, how do we say to pray in Hebrew? Lehitpalel, right? When you think grammatically in Hebrew, when you say lehit, to do something, right? It's when you start with lehit, every word that starts with lehit in Hebrew, it means to be done to me. So when you say אני הולכת להתפלל, I'm going to pray, you're not praying to yourself, you're praying to Hashem. So how does that make sense that you say להתפלל, to pray to me? I'm not praying to myself, right? And it's one of the only words that are like, it's hard to understand because it's like להתלבש, להתקלח, להתבונן. It's everything that's being done to yourself. So what is it that I do within myself that is prayer? What does the root of the word tefillah come from? And this is so interesting. In Bereshit, Yaakov, when he separated from Yosef, he didn't see him for 22 years. He was like, that's it, my son is dead, right? After 22 years, Yaakov finally sees Yosef. And what does he say? Re'o fanecha lo filalti, from the word tefillah. What does it mean? I never imagined that I would see your face. And this is where the root of tefillah comes from, filalti, which means imagine. Not only... Sorry, the word he used was filalti, which means I didn't anticipate. I never imagined. Okay, so tefillah means to imagine. Lehitpalel means I am going to imagine the connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a vision that you create. Now, and this is so beautiful, who leads the prayer? The chazan. And what does the word chazan mean? It comes from the word chazon, which means vision. So the chazan leads the vision of how you imagine your connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the cantor is presenting not only a prayer, he's presenting a vision. And so I'm going to imagine a vision. I'm going to open myself up to a new idea, right? Prayer is about visionary thinking. Prayer means I'm cultivating within myself a vision. I want to be able to imagine myself in a new way. I want to imagine myself that I'm an extension of Hashem, that I am the ambassador of divine consciousness. What does that mean? It's really, I'm elevating myself to a new level where I'm connected with Hashem, right? And so we have two dimensions of the self, by the way, and I taught this in my previous Tanya classes if you guys were there, but we have two dimensions of the self. We have the Sitra Achra, right? Which is the self that is anxious, I'm finite, I'm nothing, I'm limited, I have anxiety, panic attacks, intrusive thoughts, I'm depressed, I'm sad, whatever it is that you're dealing with, I'm jealous, I'm angry, whatever you're inclined to. That's one dimension of you. And then we have the second dimension, which is Chelek Eloka Mima'al Mamash, right? That's part of Hashem that is ingrained in us. And so what do we do when we're doing tefillah, which is the vision? We're imagining that we're elevating that dimension of ourselves, right? And we're kind of minimizing the other dimension. Every single day, we take a moment to connect with Hashem, to speak to Him, to pray. And that's the ability to step beyond the small dimension of I'm finite, I'm nothing, I'm limited to, oh my gosh, I have Hashem in me. I have divine consciousness in me. And I'm able to imagine I'm a complete partner with Hashem. And when you imagine you're a complete partner with Hashem, actually a lot of things open up and it becomes a little bit easier. Because when you're about to talk bad about your friend, you're like, wait, I'm a partner with Hashem. I have divine consciousness in me. I can't dirty my mouth, right? And they say the same thing with tefillah. When you ask Hashem for something, but all day you're talking about His children, or all day you're talking badly, or all day you're using curse words, your mouth is dirty, right? So you need to cleanse your mouth before you're able to receive anything from Hashem. You're always, when you want to be a receiver, when you want to be a vessel of light, of blessings, of shefa, of bracha, everything that Hashem wants to send you, sometimes it's blocked, right? Because we're unable to understand that we have that dimension that needs to be elevated. And it needs to be elevated through experiencing Hashem, elevating the senses, right? Understanding that Hashem is in the small details and also connecting with Him through tefillah, envisioning what it is to have that other dimension of the self. When you operate from the perspective of elevating the senses, you're a partner with God. You're experiencing Him every single day. You're coming to an awareness that you're here to transform yourself. You're not here to stay stagnant, right? Every single day you should be better, not compared to other people, compared to how you were before, right? And so you're constantly, when you're doing tefillah, you're envisioning something better for yourself, something better for your environment, for your family, for whatever needs to be changed and altered and prayed for. So I urge each and every one of you to take this opportunity really to find a small window of opportunity where you can connect with Hashem, whether it's through a small prayer in the morning, whether you're understanding and trying to connect the dots a little bit more, to have less distractions in your life, minimize it a little bit more. And the number one thing, and this is, I want to give the credit to Rabbi Koskas, who I literally sent a voice note right before this class, and I was like, help me, like, give me some information. And he was like, the best way to know Hashem is studying Torah. Hashem, literally, Torah was written from Hashem to us. The best way to know Hashem, it's like, imagine you want to know the biography of somebody in ancient times. What do? You read his book. It's not that you can really know him in real life, but you know him through his books. It's the same way with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We get to know him through Torah. So you can choose how you want to connect with Hashem through either elevating the senses, understanding the nuances in everyday life, but also the way you'll actually strengthen all of that is through the study of Torah. And I kid you not, guys, I'm not joking, the most therapeutic thing, like I'm going to save you like hundreds of dollars in therapy. Read Torah every day. Just open a book that you like. Rabbi Dessler. I don't know if you guys can look up on Amazon. It's called Strive for Truth. It talks about everything. Free will, how to not be angry. He has like all the different subjects. Take 15 minutes a day and study Torah. And it's so therapeutic for the soul, because at the end of the day, we want to elevate. That's all we want to do. We want to elevate. We want to transform. And we feel the hunger. We feel the hunger, but we suppress it. Netflix, distractions, this, that. But there is a hunger for Torah, for learning, for connection, for striving to just have that companion with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I hope you guys learned something. Guys.
Wow.